So if anybody joins us in the next couple of minutes, then they won't miss anything of great substance. Good afternoon, Ffrin Handar. Chris Johns Dwy, Cadeirydd Partneriaeth Dyfeisgar Cymunedol. I'm the co-chair of the Resourceful Communities Partnership. I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, if you are not one of those people who's lucky enough to speak Welsh, there is translation available. If you go down to the what looks like a globe on the bottom of your screen, you will see the options to click on either English or Chinese. If you click on Chinese, you will get translation coming through if somebody speaks in Welsh, and we'll test that. I'll test that out in a moment. Today's session includes two contributions on how groups in Pembrokeshire and the Rhondda work together during to provide local. Thank you, Sue. Yes, obviously. During the cost of living crisis, and then we'll have a chance for questions, and also then there'll be breakout rooms for everyone to share their experiences in this area. Rydych chi'n croeso I roi cwestiynau yn y chat neu gofyn nhw ar ôl y sgwrsiau, a hefyd bydd opsiwn I cael grŵp trafod yn Gymraeg hefyd, neu grŵp dwyieithog. Os chi'n dymuno trafod y pwnciau yn Gymraeg, jyst roed enw di yn y chat, a wedyn, greu, diolch Bechi, wedyn fyddwn ni'n gwybod bod hi moyn wneud hwnna, a bod ni'n wneud y trefniant am y grwpiau I gadw hwn digwydd. Just a request on the technical side. Once we start the presentations, can people go to mute and also turn off their cameras if you're not part of the presentation team? I know there's several of you doing the presentation from both Pembrokeshire and the Rhondda, so we'll see several faces on screen. And finally, we'll be sharing all the presentations after the event. We're just finishing translating a couple of them, which is why they're not available straight away, but it'll just be a day or so. And that's enough from me. Now for the much more interesting speakers, we're going to hear from the crew in Pembrokeshire first. So Sue, great pleasure to hand over to you.
Diolch, Chris, and thanks, and great to see everybody here. Lots of familiar faces in the audience. Right, so the first presentation, we're going to tell you a little bit about the Keep Warm, Keep Well work that we've been doing in Pembrokeshire. I'm Sue Leonard, I'm Chief Officer of PAVS, which is the County Voluntary Council for Pembrokeshire. And I've got two presenters with me here today. So we've got Sophie Buckley, also from PAVS, who has been our lead for the Keep Warm, Keep Well work, and Gemma Baker, who's from Pembrokeshire County Council, who's come along to give her perspective on the partnership working. So I'm just going to share my screen, would be a good place to start. So let me just get going with this. Can someone put a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Good. Okay, I think there might be a bit of a delay. Okay, so the Keep Warm, Keep Well campaign in Pembrokeshire was a multi-agency partnership approach in response to the cost of living crisis. And you can see from this slide that there were many partners involved, both statutory partners, Pembrokeshire County Council, Hywel Dda Health Board, emergency services, but also lots of third sector organisations that were involved in the both in the steering group and also into the delivery partnership of the programme. And I just wanted to mention the Pembrokeshire Community Hub, because Sophie will tell you a little bit more about how the role of the hub in this work, but I just wanted to say a bit about the hub, because it didn't just emerge out of nowhere. So I think it's really important to understand where it came from. So we've been working in partnership in Pembrokeshire for around about 9 years now around preventions. And that has been a really strong partnership between statutory partners and the voluntary sector. And over that period of time, we've managed to secure funding from a whole variety of sources to create quite a robust community infrastructure in Pembrokeshire, which includes the Pembrokeshire Community Hub, and that's just coming up to the first anniversary of its launch. We also have community connectors, Connect Pembrokeshire online platform. We've got community grant schemes and Pembrokeshire community support networks. So there's good community infrastructure in there. And so PAVS was asked to take a lead on the Keep Warm, Keep Well partnership work, which is a very collaborative multi-agency and cross-sector programme, because I think they knew that through the community infrastructure, we could mobilise quickly and respond effectively within a very tight timescale. That was something, the money came through, we needed to do a response quickly, and we stood the community infrastructure up to allow us to do that. We, as PAVS was the lead, we had a multi-agency steering group. We met fortnightly, every Wednesday morning for an hour, fortnightly, and for our steering group meetings. Gemma will explain a little bit more in just a moment about how that links through to other pieces of work in the county. So it's a good time now for me just to hand over to Gemma, just for Gemma to say a few quick words about the partnership from her perspective.
Thanks, Sue. I mean, you're so thorough, in your explanation. But yeah, just to really add, I suppose, to what you said already, there is just that partnership working really provides us all with those opportunities to meet the needs of our communities in a much more unified way. I think if you think about some of those key principles of partnership working, being trust, shared goals and values, that open and regular communication between partners, I would say so that, you've already outlined, a really powerful and successful example there where we did achieve true partnership working in Pembrokeshire. I think, Keep Warm, Keep Well brought together partners in Pembrokeshire from across different sectors. We really did pull together to try and improve the outcomes for local people and try and make the work that we were doing more cost and resource effective. I think that, the voluntary and community sector organisations in Pembrokeshire, they offer a huge amount, both, through the services they provide, the wealth that they generate for our communities, and then the people that they connect with and how they engage and empower them. And I think that certainly, at a time when we have rising pressure on services and, really tough financial constraints across the board, I think it is absolutely vital, that we as councils build successful partnerships and nurture them with those voluntary and community sectors and harness, the very many strengths that you bring to the table. And Keep Warm and Keep Well is just a fantastic example of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Gemma. So that's a little bit about the partnership element of the work. I'm now going to hand over to Sophie, who led the delivery side of things, to tell you what we actually did do and what we were able to achieve through that partnership working. And I should have said, as Chris said, there will be some time for questions afterwards. In the meantime, if you do have any comments or questions, please do put them in the chat, and we can deal with them then. So thank you. I'm going to hand over to Sophie.
Thank you, Sue and Gemma. Yes, so next slide, please, Sue. It was proposed in the steering group that's been mentioned that we adopt a two-phased approach to the delivery of a coordinated package of information, advice and practical support for people in Pembrokeshire experiencing financial hardship as a result of rising energy and living costs. The programme was kept under review by the multi-agency Keep Warm, Keep Well steering group and then adapted in light of service demand and available resources. Elements of phase one included a Warm Welcome Community Spaces grant, which was a PAVS administered grant, and we set it up so that communities could offer welcoming spaces where people could meet with others in their local community and take part in a range of activities. Constituted voluntary and community groups and town and community councils in Pembrokeshire were invited to apply for a grant of up to £3,500 per project for community venues to offer warm spaces and activities to connect people in the community and to stay warm during winter. And there were two elements to the fund. So there was a warm rooms running costs fund for running costs to keep spaces open and providing additional opening hours to those that were already operating. And then warm room activity funds, so for activities to actually happen in the centres, such as additional funding to buy games, put on films, refreshments, etc. PAVS administered the grant, and we were overwhelmed with the response from the community, with a total of 58 applications funded and a total of nearly £148,000 awarded. So warm spaces were added to an interactive map that has been built on the Connect Pembrokeshire website for this campaign. Grant recipients were invited to join a network so we could support them and their volunteers with information, support and training as required. We also notified warm space grant recipients of additional funding opportunities that then came in later on, such as the Pembrokeshire Food Poverty Grant, so they could apply to provide hot meals within their warm space if they so wished, and many did. Warm Welcome Community Spaces provided a wide range of activities and support, and the feedback has been very positive. So yeah, some spaces also provided warm hot meals. We also had a communications and marketing campaign then, so to let people know where they could find their nearest warm space, for example, and also to direct them to wider support that was on offer from wider third sector delivery partners and providers. Another initiative that we set up was warm packs. So the steering group were also keen to develop warm packs to heat the person, not the home. And West Wales Care and Repair and ATEB delivered this for us. Basically, a number of items were put together, including a blanket, hat, gloves, scarf, microwavable heat pack, a thermal mug and flask. And we encouraged people to contact the Pembrokeshire Community Hub if they felt that they would benefit from one. And we also provided some additional information with that too. And referrals for those could also be made by health and social care colleagues as well, and third sector support workers. And we kept the demand for warm packs under review, and we did end up providing some additional funding for those as well. We also arranged for additional capacity, so additional funding for third sector providers who were already providing information, advice and assistance. So that included funding for energy fuel vouchers, and also a project to provide a discretionary assistance fund top-up for people that were on oil central heating, because we did find that people that were on oil central heating weren't necessarily receiving any additional support, and that there was a gap there that we were able to identify. Phase 2, we provided more funding for more fuel vouchers to keep up with the demand that Citizens Advice Pembrokeshire were seeing. Also more warm packs, again, to keep up with demand. We also developed a warm room in the home scheme with West Wales Care and Repair. So this was to help people who, to ensure that at home they had at least one room that was draft free and warm, where they could feel safe and secure and just be able to stay warm. So funding for items such as draft excluders, letterbox covers, etc. Another project was developed around energy efficient cooking equipment. So air fryers have been distributed by Norman Industries at Pembrokeshire County Council on our behalf. And also funding was awarded to a local organisation called Pembrokeshire Baby Bank who are providing clothing and essential items for babies and children, families that are in the most need of that support. So there was also continued promotion of Keep Warm, Keep Well in Pembrokeshire throughout. And I'll talk to you about that in the next slide, please, Sue. So as Sue's already said, PAVS is the lead partner for Pembrokeshire Community Hub, and it made sense for the Pembrokeshire Community Hub to be nominated as the single point of contact for people wanting to access support from or contribute resources to the Keep Warm, Keep Well programme. The hub was established in 2020 in response to COVID, and as the CVC for Pembrokeshire, PAVS also provides direct support for voluntary and community groups and facilitates a number of thematic networks supporting people who are most likely to be impacted by the rising costs of living. So PAVS has used these channels and our partnerships that were already in existence to ensure that information is passed quickly to those people who need help most. So the campaign was run through our existing infrastructure, including the Community Hub, but also the Pembrokeshire Community Support Network, the Pembrokeshire Community Buildings Network, Community Connectors, and also Pembrokeshire Digital Connections. So we used some funding to cover the cost of designing and delivering the campaign so that people knew where they could get help, advice, and practical support, and how they could also contribute. So we also put a shout out to people who may like to volunteer or may like to donate or help and support others in their community in the way that we saw during COVID. A leaflet was delivered to every household in December and again in March. And the key message was to call the hub, and one call, that's all. I'm pleased to say people did call. There was also a social media marketing campaign. So we pushed out regular tweets and posts on Facebook and Twitter to spread the word and to encourage people to reach out. We've also developed an online presence utilising the Connect Pembrokeshire website that we already had and we're already responsible for maintaining. So we use that to build a repository of information, and we included information under 5 key headings, so energy, food, money, care and transport. And we also built an interactive map. So the map shows where the 100 warm welcome community spaces are located, and people use this map to find their local and nearest warm space. Anybody that is not online was always able to call the hub. So we have a local 01437 Haverfordwest telephone number. So we've made sure that anybody who's digitally excluded could still access information, and we were able to provide that over the telephone. Next slide, please, Sue. So we're still collating outcomes and outputs from the programme of work into a final report, but we do have some data that we can share at this point. So a total of 107 warm welcome community spaces were added to the interactive map and promoted as part of the campaign. 73 of these were supported with Welsh Government and local authority funding via a PAVS administered grant. And initial monitoring data suggests that in total warm spaces received 18,000 visits during autumn winter 22-23. Next slide, please, Sue. 734 emergency fuel vouchers were issued to people in Pembrokeshire, with 242 families and 74 individuals assisted with holistic financial support, all of whom were in crisis. And that's data provided by Citizens Advice Pembrokeshire. We issued 600 warm packs and 200 air fryers. And 12 people were assisted with debt relief order fees and bankruptcy fees. And a number of families were supported and individuals with debt advice. We were able to provide 50 £250 top-ups of DAF payments. And several of those payments were made to people living in rural areas and also in the Gypsy traveller community. We were able to enhance staff and volunteer capacity to support older people living in Pembrokeshire who were experiencing financial hardship and fuel poverty. And we were also able to fund £5,000 towards donations of pet food for people who are struggling to pay food and energy bills, and who told us that having some support to feed their pets would be a big help to them. We also provided additional capacity for a fuel poverty helpline, recruiting for fuel poverty champions, and also holding community drop-ins. And we were also able to increase the distribution of equipment and clothing for families experiencing hardship in Pembrokeshire to keep up with the demand that we were seeing. Thank you very much. So I think back to you now, I think, Sue.
Right, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. Just to say that that with all of that work, I'm really pleased to say that it's not a we had to stand that campaign up really quickly, and we were able to do that through the community infrastructure that we had. And now the actual Keep Warm, Keep Well campaign is sort of stepping down. But the work is not stopping, because what we're now doing, of course, is we've got developing a tackling poverty strategy for Pembrokeshire, and that Keep Warm, Keep Well multi-agency cross-sector steering group will now become the tackling poverty operational group for Pembrokeshire. That will report into a strategic group, and then in turn that goes up to the Public Services Board. PABS was also successful in drawing down some funding from the UK Community Renewal Fund, and we were able to fund a piece of research that actually spoke to around about 30 plus people with lived experience of living in financial hardship. And some of the stories that they told us were quite illuminating, actually. And that research, plus some, in addition to some other work that was done in schools with younger people and families, has really helped shape that tackling poverty strategy. So, as Gemma said, really, by working in partnership together, we can all bring something to the table. And to be honest, we were talking just before coming online. The number of crises, the number of issues that are facing us are so big that it's impossible for any single organisation, no matter how large, to solve on their own. So partnership working is really the only way to go. So I hope you found that interesting. We're open for questions. I can see there's one, DRO fees. Oh, that debt relief order. Yes, okay. So there's one question in there from Liz. I mean, Sophie, I don't know, do you have the answer to that?
Yes, I believe we are, and inquiries would need to go to Citizens Advice Pembrokeshire for that. I mean, we've talked about things that we would like to continue to fund. Initial funding from Welsh Government was up until the end of March, but actually there was, we were able to access some other funding to kind of continue a couple of things. And we are looking at, picking things up again in autumn, when maybe people may feel that, the heating needs to go back on and things like that. But yeah, to answer Liz's question, yes, there is still support available, and Citizens Advice Pembrokeshire would be the organisation to contact about that.
Thanks, Sophie. I think just in terms of looking ahead, as you say, we believe there will be some funding made available to us to step the Keep Warm, Keep Well campaign back up again. What we're doing in the meantime, as well as the Tackling Poverty strategy, is that we have PAVS has applied to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund in Pembrokeshire for some funding to do some work around a cost of living crisis, but in a more preventative way. I think the Keep Warm, Keep Well has been mostly picking up the pieces, where people are really just fallen, they're just facing crisis. So we've been picking up the pieces and dealing with that. But we want to do some more work that's more preventative around sort of energy efficiency, energy saving measures, and also money management and debt advice and so on. So, we've put whether or not we'll get the money, we've yet to see, but we were able to write that application with a lot of support from partners around the table. It's much easier to put things in, funding bids in, when you've got support for partnership around you and you know that what you're asking for is absolutely what is needed. So we've got that, as well as looking forward to doing some more work if we need to do so over the winter. We're looking forward to stepping that up. And of course the hub is still there, so the one call, that's all approach is still there. So even though the Keep Warm, Keep Well campaign at its height is sort of starting to we're starting to see a slight improvement now the weather's warmer, but the hub's still there. Are there any other questions or comments?
Any more questions for Sue, Sophie, and Gemma? I mean, if you think of anything later, please feel free to ask them when we come to the end of the second presentation. But at this stage, shall we move over to Sarah and James, talk about their work in the Rhondda?
Yep. Okay. So a minute, I'll just share the screen. Good afternoon, Nanda. I'm Sarah Lloyd-Jones, and I work for a small independent charity called People and Work. We only work in Wales, and we've been around since the mid-80s, and we've seen a number of crises in those periods come and go. And so basically what we were going to talk today about was about collaboration and what the value of collaboration is, and some of the kind of the barriers and some of the benefits. And drawing on the involvement we've had over the last 3 years with 9 partners across Wales on the Llachiglo a Chefn Gwlad project. And this is a project that has worked with 3 partners in Gwynedd, including yr Orsaf, and Greta's here today, 3 from the old coalfield communities in South Wales, and 3 from the middle of Wales, the agricultural heartland. And during that period of partnership, there was a lot of insight really into the value of dealing with crisis, because the project started just before the COVID pandemic, and then it went straight into the cost of living crisis afterwards. So there was a lot that we were learning about how important collaboration was. So if I start with looking at what, if you are trying to tackle some critical needs within your community, you would look to collaborate. And this is drawing on the learning from the Llachiglo a Chefn Gwlad project, and also from the work that we're doing in Rhondda, but I'm going to pass on to my colleague James in a bit to talk about that in more detail. So basically what you can see is that you collaborate because you need to understand local needs and how they intersect. And when you have people who are working together, they're very often bringing different groups of people and different insights from those different groups of people, even within a small community, and sharing those. So you get to a much, much richer feel for what's going on within a community and what's going on within sections of the community. And there's a real benefit to learning from each other. And, you know, certainly within our partnership work, learning across communities too. So learning what another community is doing to tackle an issue can be incredibly insightful in terms of thinking, well, is that something we could be doing? Is that something that we could be taking forward? And this, obviously, this event today is part of that thinking, really. It's also about trying to make sure, oh, sorry, gone back now. To make things easier, really, for the people that you're working with. That, you know, if you're what we do know is that people in communities really don't care who is providing the support. What they care about is that the support is accessible and that they know about it. So really, the closer you can be in terms of how you're working together, the easier you're going to make it for people, because you can work towards support becoming seamless and moving away from we're doing this to this is what is available. It's also about actually looking at developing a stronger and more sustainable local infrastructure. One of the things that you know we've seen over time is very often, for example, the public sector is a bit reluctant to work with the voluntary sector, because they are excuse me, they are aware that voluntary sector work is very often short-term funded. And, you know, if you start referring people to the voluntary sector, in a year or two, that service might have disappeared altogether. And so if you want to go beyond what you're offering to actually developing the kind of infrastructure that is sustainable within your communities, it becomes essential that you are actually working with others and that you are drawing others together, so that even if your work should disappear, that infrastructure is still there and that community can still draw on help. And then it's also about how you use resources much more effectively. And, you know, one of the things that we do know is that funders are increasingly interested in, well, it's not increasingly, they always have been. Life is easier for a funder if it can fund one program, and under that program there are lots of different things going on. So people are always being pushed in partnerships and collaboration, and very often the approach is being a push from outside, being encouraged to say, well, you need to work with others from outside. But actually there is no reason that we as voluntary sector organizations shouldn't be taking the lead in that and saying, well, how do we ensure that what resources we've got are being used to the maximum effect within this community by sharing our resources, but also by collaborating so that we can actually access more resources for our community by coming together and working collaboratively. So I'm going to pass on to James now to talk a bit about how this has all been happening in Rhondda, and developing that kind of insight from one particular community, looking at the two Rhondda valleys.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think to start this, it's really important that I think the project team take a view that the community is sort of a living and breathing organism, and it changes quite often. And that's why 2-year projects sometimes don't work, because in 6 months, in the volatile climate we find ourselves in now, things change so quickly. Well, and that's why you need to rely on partners then to perhaps fill the gaps not even you can fill. And this is some of the examples we've actually got of that. So the cost of living events, when we start to realize the seismic change of the economy in the UK, and actually realize the issues the cost of living was going to have on residents in Rhondda, we decided to put on events and bring people to these events with far better expertise than ourselves. and this proved to be, it was real mixed, to be honest. So I think that the first event, we had lots of organisations there that did link in with each other, and after that, they did start delivering programs to with each other. And the second event, there was more resident focused. So we had people there from even the public sector themselves came, and residents could come in and just pick away at some of the people that deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And again, I think it's been humble in our approach of, well, we can't do this ourselves. We don't have the resources. We don't have the expertise to fight this cost of living crisis. Even though we know what some of the residents need and want, it's about signposting effectively and bringing them all to one place rather than saying, oh, go over there, go over there. I think that was really important for us. And then, so the next point here, Green Light, Reading Rhondda and Digital Rhondda. So these are 3 separate projects. Green Light's focused on employment. Reading Rhondda's focused on tackling literacy rates in the Rhondda, which did see a big regression point through the pandemic. And Digital Rhondda is about engaging people digitally and teaching them coding and how to use the internet safely, and also loaning out devices to people that don't actually have access to them. And we provide SIM cards as well so they can get on the internet. And what's quite key to a lot of these is a lot of these are plug in public sector issues potentially. So Green Light, for example, employment, will immediately think of the job centre, and rather than go at odds with the job centre than try and sort of say, oh my gosh, you're not doing your job correctly, we push that to a side and we actually work with them as closely as possible. And I think we've really tried hard in the last 2 years to keep any sort of conflict with public sector out of the way of partnership working. So Green Light effectively is a part of the job centre at the moment in Rhondda, and the job centre guys refer them into our team to have some more in-depth work, because the job centre will admit themselves they don't necessarily have the time and the capacity to work in depth with someone who needs that really hand-holding approach. And I think that's been really good for them to have an outlet for that, and it's allowed them to be more honest in their approach to their work as well. Reading Rhondda, the easiest way to put this is this really helps some schools that are really struggling with staffing numbers. The Rhondda again has just seen more cuts to LSAs and other teachers. So when our colleague Natasha goes into school and delivers these reading projects and leaves the resources with the family engagement officers, it allows sustainability to be brought into it. And that partnership with the school has been a revelation with us. They've really opened their arms up to us and really told us some of the struggles they were facing, whereas perhaps a few years ago, pre-pandemic, they were a bit more closed off. And I think that's been really important. And Digital Rhondda has been tapped into by a lot of other third sector organisations that have a lot of sort of service users that don't have access to the internet, don't have access to devices. That's where they bring us in. And we've been really open to this approach of services have almost rented us for the day to go in and work with the service users they already have. And that's been a really an interesting project more than anything. And I think the digital poverty was pushed to the front of COVID, and it's important we don't forget the lessons we did learn through the pandemic, which I think is always a risk, as we've come from the pandemic, as Sarah said, straight into a cost of living crisis. The international students, this has been a lot of learning on the job for us all in Rhondda. For those who don't know, Rhondda, a small valley community, 45 minutes, 50 minutes from Cardiff on the car. But international students have started coming to USW, and it's been fantastic. They bring different culture, different ideas, and it's something I think a lot of people in Rhondda have embraced. And the issue surrounding international students is they don't have any access or recourse to public funding, and the visas are very different and difficult to navigate. And these guys are come up with some real issues. We've had homeowners taking advantage of asking for 12 months rent up front. We've had some really gnarly situations like this, and the team have now dragged in other organisations that don't normally work with international students, don't normally work with sort of anyone to do with immigration. And we've brought organisations together to help these international students survive and thrive for their stay in the UK. And supporting individuals, I think we've we've looked at signposting and we've really tried to strip it down. And what is signposting? What does it mean? And signposting to us isn't very effective. And we've really tried to take the we've really tried to take the thing of, okay, yeah, we don't do this, go to these guys. We've tried to strip that away even more. And we are now coming up with this hub of organizations that we can bring to these people. And I think that's been really important in our approach to community work in the Rhondda. And supporting individuals obviously is at the crux of everything we do. But again, we constantly sort of reflect on the work we do and the collaboration we have with other partners. And those partners are now reflecting on the work they do as well. And I think that's been really, really interesting. And as our team is quite diverse in skills and knowledge, we've almost been seconded to other organizations for long periods of time to help them develop in different ways. And we're trying to develop this anchor organization of Rhondda where people can go and people can learn and upskill without threat of anything else. Through the pandemic, I think we've seen some fantastic collaboration. And as we've come out of the pandemic and the funding world has got harder, some people have become really protective over that. And all those lessons we learned in the pandemic, some of them are going to be missed. And I think it's really important we try to hold on to them, especially the work in collaboration.
Thanks, James. So what have we learned over the years and with various partnerships on how you collaborate? One of the things I think that we feel is really important is that you keep the focus on the community, not on the partnership. You know, there is sometimes a danger with collaboration and with partnership work that the partners get on so well that they really are functioning as a really effective partner, but that isn't necessarily spilling over into the way they work on their own individually. And there is, you know, there's that kind of danger sometimes that you have, well, to be honest, you sometimes see this with statutory services too. You have an extremely good way of working collaboratively, but it's not changing what's happening on the ground. So we feel it's really, really strongly that you need to focus all the time on and what difference are we making to these people, and what difference is this doing? Why are we in partnership in the first place? Finding the good people to work with is really, really important. Very often, and particularly where partnerships and collaboration is being pushed from outside, there will be this focus on saying, right, we've got to get the right organizations around the table. But one of the things that we've found is that that's not enough. Getting the right organizations around the table won't work unless you've got the right people around the table. And partnership is ultimately about the relationship between people and making sure that those people are share a core ethos, share values, and are willing to work together. It's also about being sufficiently honest with yourself as an organization to look at the limits of what you can do. And, you know, only yesterday, I was doing some work around a real health issue that people across communities face. Went on a big charity's website and it said, we are the only people who are working with this health issue. And I just thought, it makes your heart sink. You know, what do they really think genuinely they are the only people who are working with that health problem? Do they not understand the lived experience of people with that health problem in their communities? And the only thing you can think is, well, they're doing that because for funding purposes, that they are trying to say, you know, you have to fund us because we're the only people who are doing it. And it is true that funders do sometimes push us into competition and away from the processes of collaboration. But fundamentally, in order to collaborate, as James was just saying, you have to look up, well, what can't we do? And who can do those things? And how can we work collaboratively to ensure that that happens? And that does require a little bit of honesty amongst ourselves. We need to look at ourselves. And also we need to look at the limitations of what our partners can do. Because again, and particularly sometimes when you're working with the statutory sector, there can be an assumption that a partner can do everything we can't do. and we have to accept that there are limitations on what anyone can do, and we have to work within those limitations in order to make a difference and to ensure that we are going to be effective as because part of the collaboration is there is mutual respect and mutual trust, and there isn't going to be mutual respect and mutual trust unless we all recognize each other's limitations. So what works? And I suppose coming back to that point about that charity that made my heart sink, dropping the egos, you know, it's not about you and your organization. It is about people who need support. And if you can keep that always in focus, and I know it can be difficult, particularly when we're all fighting for limited funding, but it is really not about you and your organization. We know that that there are funders out there that really understand and support collaboration. But one of the things that I do think that we could do better is to support them to understand it even better, particularly around the whole thing about targets and meeting your targets. If you can talk to a funder about collaborative targets, if they want collaborative work, there need to be collaborative targets. And if there are ways that we can actually talk about them and talk about it in such a way that to say at a community level, these things are changing, rather than having to say, we're doing this, they're not doing this. This is our number, this isn't their number. It would make a massive, massive difference. So I think there is a need, but when funders understand, it's fantastic and it's brilliant. And I think that was one of the things that COVID did show us, when you had a common issue that all funders really understood, all of a sudden there was much more awareness of collaborative impacts. And in terms of looking at that, then we can't assume because we're working together that we are doing things better or we are doing things even well. So developing systems between the collaborators to say, what difference are we making? What would good look like? And how can we make sure that we're doing this as well as we could possibly do it? How are we collecting that information? Really, really important. Once in collaboration, and this again, really, a lot of the work that we do is around about supporting evaluations and doing evaluations. One of the things that comes up time and time again is that organizations will collaborate and get very, very close when they're developing a bid. And once that bid is successful, somehow it all falls away and everyone just gets on with the day job. And that whole thing about how you keep talking and how you keep that open and honest communication going. And it takes time. One of the things that we did with the Llechi Glor Hem Gwlad project was we managed to get funding to pay for partnership time. So to pay for the managers to come to meetings, to share ideas, to share what they were doing. Because there is a cost attached to good partnership working, and there is a cost attached to good collaboration. And finally, I do think that what is really, really important and cannot be undervalued is the whole thing about collaborators, partnerships based on shared values. And that underlines everything, because if you don't have those shared values, and if you don't have the shared values through the organization, the other issue that can very often happen within collaboration is that the people who set that collaboration up, particularly with bigger organizations, are not the ones who actually are tasked with managing the relationships and that collaboration on an ongoing basis. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to hand over that collaboration to a staff member, you have to be 100% sure that that staff member gets it and understands why you're doing it and understands what the importance of those shared values actually is going to be. That's it. Any questions? Very happy to take them. Silence.
Gemma, go for it.
So It's not so much a question, Sarah, but I just wanted to say, I was kind of nodding furiously, but that just one of your last comments there around the cost that is attached to good collaboration. I mean, my head kind of nearly came off my shoulders, because I've been responsible for distributing grants, of various scales. And I think that, the level of engagement is so vastly different when you are asking people to engage with you based on goodwill. Goodwill isn't sustainable. And I think sometimes, we have those shared values. And I think that, we all have, the same vision and the place that we want to get to. But I think, that the true cost of what that collaboration looks like, and the sustainability of it when you are trying to operate on goodwill, I think is just, I agreed with everything you said. And I just thought it's a really important point for us to acknowledge the cost of quality collaboration. And I've been kind of in the position, asking for input and asking for assistance with, without having the money to put on the table to back that up. And it's, it's not as successful as when you can kind of almost put your money where your mouth is, effectively. A lot of the grants are changing now, and that it's becoming less and less of an issue, but it is still an issue that we see. And I think it's a really good point that you raised.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sue, do you want to come in?
Yeah, that was a really great presentation, Sarah. Thanks. And like Gemma and Sophie, I think colleagues, I was nodding away in the background as well. I think there was a point that you made about sometimes the sort of reluctance to engage perhaps with voluntary sector groups because of short-term funding, and they might not be around for too long, or the service might not be around for too long. But I think, we've been working, as I say, on that preventions programme board for about 9 years now. And, we have seen services come and go and so on, but taken overall over that period of time, the voluntary sector has contributed quite significant amounts of funding into the mix. It's not all one-way traffic, and actually, by the time you add in the funding, the volunteer time and other resources that the sector bring to the table, it's not all about just the public sector funding the voluntary sector. So I think that recognition that everybody brings something to the table. And then just one final point there. The other thing is about the relationship building. And we've had a bit of a testing time recently, because we've had a number of key people that we've worked with for many years on the Preventions Partnership Board. They've left to take up other jobs. So we've lost people that we've built up strong relationships with. And I had a bit of a crisis, a bit of a wobble, thinking, oh God, was the relationship with the person, or was it with the organisation? Are the values shared organisationally, or is it just that we got on well together as people, so we made things happen? But I'm pleased to say that early days, but so far I think it is the values that we share organisationally and the shared strategies and plans. And I'm pleased to say the best bit about the partnership, the Keep Well, Keep Warm partnership and other partnerships recently, one thing about a crisis response is that it does force you to actually into action, whereas you can actually have collaboration that spend years just talking to each other, whereas crisis forces you to do things together. And when you do things together, you actually, that relationship builds really much more quickly and strongly, I think.
Thank you, Sue. Are there any more questions or indeed reflections on what you've heard, what people have heard? Catherine.
Sorry, I can't find my hand. I just wanted to say that the one thing that really struck me was I may have sort of understood it wrong actually, but I took away from, you can build a really strong partnership partnership group. And sometimes we pride ourselves on the strength of the partnership, and we forget that the point of the partnership is to deliver stuff and to do things and to do work. And I think that's really important. And I'm going to write that down somewhere, but I'm not sure if I'm actually paraphrasing slightly incorrectly.
No, that is. But to be honest, I draw often in my thinking on a multi-agency partnership. I once did some work with in a local authority not 100 miles away, where they were meeting at one point just to discuss one family. There were 14 agencies in that room. they were discussing that family for over a year. And whilst they were discussing that family, everything fell apart for that family. Child ended up out of school, the family ended up homeless, but the partnership, those 14 agencies, were meeting regularly and having incredibly effective meetings. They just weren't making a difference to that family. In fact, they weren't even stopping the downward trend. So yeah, that is what I was saying, is that you can end up having a great partnership but still not making a difference. I always quote my mother, who used to say, she was a nurse, the operation was a great success but the patient died.
Right.
And I think it's that kind of thinking, really.
Thank you. Chris Thomas.
Diolch yn fawr. Let's use the Chinese symbol. Na i fe yn y Gymraeg. Diolch i bawb am yr cyfraniadau, a mae'n bwysig I glywed trwy mae pethau'n gweithio'n gwahanol rhannau o Gymru, a oedd e'n dda I glywed y profiadau wedyn o'r cymoedd. Ond yn Sir Benfro, dwi'n gweithredu trwy Planed, un o partneriaid, ond hefyd yn cael cyfle I weld ar llawr gwlad shwt mae pobl gwirfoddolwyr yn ymwneud gyda yr cymorth sy'n dod trwyddo. Felly mae arian, mae cael cyllid grantiau yn hynod o bwysig mewn lleoliadau fel neuaddau. Hefyd capeli, fi wedi gweld capeli a eglwysi yn defnyddio'r arian I roi cymorth pan mae yna yn yr argyfwng costau byw ac ati. Felly mae rhaid I ni ffindio rhyw ffordd, a fi'n credu dwi'n gadeirydd ar gyngor cymuned Crymych, a wnaethon ni helpu yn yr ward o ran sicrhau bod lleoliadau'n datblygu, ond hefyd rhoi arian mas o'r precept. Felly mae yna le rhywle yn dos I glymu mewn amser gwirfoddoli, am ddim, ond hefyd clymu mewn arian precept o'r cyngor cymuned neu cyngor tre, a hefyd arian sy'n dod trwyddo'r cyngorau gwirfoddol yn y siroedd, a hefyd o'r cyngor sir, neu ffynonell eraill. Felly mae clymu hynna â'i gilydd yn gymleth, ond fi'n credu bod yna fformiwla ar gael I helpu cymunedau sydd angen cymorth, ond fel ni'n gwybod mae bob cymuned yn wahanol, mae yna rhai cymunedau gyda unigolion sydd wedi ymddeol, proffesiynol, sy'n medru rhoi ceisiadau â'i gilydd, a wedyn mae cymunedau eraill ble mae'r gallu hynny ddim mor barod. Felly sicrhau bod cyfleoedd cyfartal ar gyfer cymunedau, a fi'n credu bod platfform fel ni'n trafod heddi yn bwysig I ddysgu o'n profiadau, a fel ni'n mynd mlaen, sicrhau bod pawb yn cael eu tynnu mewn, ynddo fe. Felly diolch am drefnu heddi. Diolch.
Diolch, Chris. Sue, you've got your hat. Sorry, I'm just checking. There's no. Come back, Sue, if you want. There's nobody else waiting. Yeah, you're not on mute, so.
Have you asked me to go? Or...
Yes, please.
Yes, sorry, I was still on the translation channel. So, yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think if every community had a Chris Thomas, it would be excellent. But anyway, I was just going to make a point about partnership. Actually, another going back to the partnership, the Preventions Programme Board, which does include Planet, as Chris has said. So, and other partners. I sometimes reflect that is one of the very few partnerships, if not the only partnership, actually, maybe, where we work in that cross-sector way, where perhaps keep warm, keep well is in the same thing. Well, we've actually come together because we wanted to come together. So, that Preventions Partnership Board was formed about 9 years ago. Nobody told us we had to have one. It wasn't a partnership by design like the PSBs are, or the I think I saw Kevin on the call, like the RPBs are, the regional partnership boards. you know, this was not a partnership by design. This was a partnership because we saw that something needed to be done. And somebody from the local authority, one of the commissioners in social care, actually started to bring that partnership together. It's broadened out massively now, but I do think there's something about that, you know, sometimes you get these partnerships that are there because we're told we have to have them, and we're told who has to be on them. And normally the thing we achieve is a strategy and an action plan and lots of papers and things. But where we come together to do something because we want to do it, that's the power of partnership working, I think. So Dad, I just wanted to share that before we go into the breakout rooms, Chris.
Thank you, Susan. That's extremely relevant. Are there any final questions or points people want to make? We are, as Sue said, we are going to go into breakout rooms in a couple of minutes. I can't see any other hands or questions. Right.